Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the coup that wasn't a coup at all in the end, and try to make sense of an incredibly bizarre period of a few days in which Russia went to war with Russia, and without very much fighting at all, both sides lost. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, how to draw any sense out of a situation that has most people baffled. It's a good job I didn't try to do a video on this yesterday, isn't it? I imagine there are more than a few columnists having to row back a fair bit now, although to be fair to them, it's not their fault. This was surely the most bizarre coup in history. This was a coup where both sides quite literally lost. Wagner chickened out, for reasons unknown, but they chickened out. But Putin also chickened out. This coup wasn't a coup. It's just ended up exposing how weakly defended Western Russia is. If Russia were to be invaded from Europe, it would fold immediately. Very quickly, for those who don't know many of the details, before I go over some of the possible consequences here, the Wagner Group's a large more organised than many of the Russian forces anyway, mercenary force, which seems to be Russia's most effective fighting force. A few weeks ago, their leader, Evgeny Prigozhin, started attacking the Russian government for their mishandling of the war in Ukraine. Cue lots of jokes about, oh, we'd better stay away from open windows on the 5th floor. He was setting himself in direct confrontation with Putin's government. Then on Friday, he announced that he was staging a coup. Didn't just do it, didn't just catch everyone off by surprise. No, he gave advance notice of it. He didn't seem to be specifically targeting Putin, but members of his government, including the Minister of Defence. But as Putin was standing by his ministers, the coup would involve deposing Putin as well. Wagner made very rapid progress through Russia, meeting no serious resistance, and then stopped a bit over 200 miles from Moscow, I think. Belarus President Lukashenko had negotiated on Putin's behalf, and an agreement for de-escalation, as it was called, was announced. Prigozhin would turn his troops back and then go and live in exile in Belarus. Bit of a head scratcher for military strategy experts who could see all the signs that this coup was going to succeed. Putin and his oligarchs had fled Moscow, with many having fled the country altogether. All that was protecting Moscow was a ring of trucks containing sand. And because Wagner were not being resisted by conventional Russian forces, at least not until that point, there was no serious doubt in anyone's mind, no matter who you asked, military strategic experts in the UK, in the US, Ukraine, wherever, they were all going, well, this is it now, it's over, the coup is going to succeed. There's nothing stopping it. So why did Prigozhin surrender? He says to avoid loss of Russian life. Now, there may be something in that, in all honesty, but neither Wagner nor the Russian authorities are going to be open and honest about what's really going on here. There will be various statements made, and even if they all tally with each other, I would still take what is said with a huge pinch of salt. If the coup had succeeded, and there was no reason for it not to, it would have led to the rapid destabilisation of both Russia and Belarus, which is why Lukashenko wanted to get involved in the negotiating a peace deal here. And that actually may be what gave Prigozhin for thought, just my idea there, because maybe he could see that there wouldn't be a smooth transfer of power without terrible consequences. Remember, he's not a hero in this, by the way. He's not a hero. He is arguably a worse monster than Putin. He actually could be worse. It would have actually been a scarier thought that he has access to nuclear weapons, assuming they haven't all just rusted away and been useless. If we assume that Russia still has a nuclear capability, it would arguably be worse that this guy has them than Putin. Prigozhin certainly shares Putin's goals. He was just upset, it seems, at the incompetence, which meant Russian fighters, including his own fighters, being thrown into the meat grinder in Ukraine. Wagner are more used to murdering and pillaging in North Africa and the Middle East, not taking on NATO-backed modern military armies fighting to defend their own country. So if Prigozhin had changed his mind based on the likely consequences, why did he ever start it? Well, he's not considered a powerful intellect. In fact, I've seen mention from people who pay rather closer attention to these things than I do, that he is actually as thick as two short planks. So it's entirely possible he led this insurrection without the foggiest idea about the consequences. Without the foggiest. But the coup has ended, at least for now. In theory, Putin is guaranteeing immunity from prosecution for Wagner and security guarantees. These are, of course, worthless. And if any Wagner fighter believes them, they are as thick as their now exiled leader. What Putin has agreed to do, other than simply provide immunity to prosecution, I do not know. We will have to find out for later. As for Prigozhin, he is going into exile in Belarus. I would imagine he'd be better off asking for a bungalow, because open windows will now be his natural predator. He might also want to keep a Geiger counter handy for when he's drinking tea as well. And I wonder if this has a whiff of Carthage and ancient Rome about it, where Carthage had beaten Rome, but decided not to sack the city. They left them alone. Rome rebuilt, came back, beat Carthage. They did not hold back after their military victory either. There is a reason why Rome exists today and Carthage does not. But there are going to be serious consequences here. In fact, let's look at some obvious questions. First, so Wagner were operating outside of Russia. They were operating in the Middle East. They were operating in North Africa, as well as just more recently Ukraine. What's going to happen there now? Is Russia's influence going to weaken in these regions? Second, Putin has shown himself as weak. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they expected Zelensky's government to flee and for Kiev to fall quickly. This did not occur. Zelensky stayed and galvanized his people. But when Russian forces marched on Moscow, Putin fled. Everyone fled. All the people around him fled. This exposed two things: that he had no confidence in his own country's defences, and he lacks the courage to face down an invasion personally. His grip on power is surely much weakened after this. But another third question is, how will Russians now see their own security? Putin has pushed the idea of NATO being this enemy on their doorstep for years. People in Russia will naturally be wary. Well, how much worse will those fears be now? A band of mercenaries were able to march within striking distance of Moscow. And they only stopped because they were persuaded, not because they were repelled. They were not repelled, they were persuaded. If Wagner had wanted to carry on and take Moscow, it would now be already under his control. There is no doubt about this from the experts. So now put yourselves in the shoes of a Russian who believes that NATO is their enemy, as opposed to their own government. So then you'll naturally think, well, what if NATO invades Russia now? So you previously thought you had this powerful military. You know how the joke was going yesterday? It's like Russia went from having the second best army in the world to the second best army in Ukraine to the second best army in Russia. But, you know, you thought to yourself you had this really powerful military and no one would be able to take it. Well, you can't now think that. Your powerful military is stuck in Ukrainian mud. Some mercenaries marched on Moscow very quickly. Regular Russian forces stood back for them. Now, of course, they're not going to stand back and welcome an invading NATO army. But you wouldn't necessarily think they'll fight either, because those army units have exposed the fact that they have no loyalty to Putin. So they might actually just run. What we've seen here is that Russia is not defended. It's not. Moscow was going to attempt to repel Wagner with a ring of trucks filled with sand to act as a barricade. That was their plan. How would that work against a well-resourced NATO force attacking from both the land and the air? Not a chance. Which of course highlights something else, because despite Russia being exposed as vulnerable, NATO is not invading. After all, if they did, it would end the war very quickly. Very quickly indeed. But they're not doing it. Because in reality, nobody in the West wants to invade Russia. They don't actually want to destabilise Russia. We just want Russia to stop invading others. What this means for Ukraine is less clear as well. Had the coup succeeded, then the Russian attack would fall away badly. It would make no difference if Prigozhin thought the campaign was worthwhile or not. The chaos he would cause would have meant there'd be no way of regrouping. But this will still have given Ukraine some opportunities. I cannot imagine it has improved the resolve of already demoralised Russian soldiers to see how weakly defended their own land is. Putin is exposed as weak. He began yesterday by saying that Wagner fighters taking part in the coup would be punished. He ended up offering them immunity from prosecution and giving their leader a nice retirement package. Lukashenko comes out of this with a reputation enhanced because he was the peace broker. He also gets to keep his position because Putin fallen would have meant that he would have followed shortly afterwards. But the Wagner group is now, I suppose, of unknown use to Russia. I shall be very interested to hear the more considered thoughts in the next few days. But, you know, look at it. Its leaders going into exile. Their fighters may be unsure about who to trust now. And these are Russia's least shit fighters, remember. They're also a quarter of Russia's forces in Ukraine. Putin will know that he cannot trust Wagner, but he also knows he cannot trust many of his own conventional units. They just stood aside and allowed the insurrectionists through. In fact, Putin has been getting everything wrong since last February. He's already quite paranoid, although perhaps it's not really paranoia if they really are out to get you. He will now see that his grip on power is very weak. Certainly everyone else sees it. Russia is undefended, and the Russian government does not trust their own military. This is not just a coup that petered out because its leader turned out to be a colossal cretin, but everyone believes there will be a follow-up. But there we are. Those are my thoughts for now. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.